So thank you all for coming to this session. I know that there was a lot of competition. I would not be offended if at some point you step out to go hear some of the other great talks going on. I just asked that people show up early so I could get a nice 4-room picture, which I already did. And so, but yes, thank you. So I'm Clarence, a Presidential Innovation Fellow who for the past year has been working with a team at the White House across the U.S. CTO's office, so Megan Smith's office, as well as the Office of Social Innovation within the Domestic Policy Council and the Office for Justice Affairs, Housing and Economic Opportunities on what we are calling the White House Police Data Initiative. Pretty straightforward. What I want to do today, you all may have heard about it in some form or fashion previously. Can I just see maybe a quick show of hands to see people who may have just heard the name before, at least? Okay, decent number. So Cam Caldwell from Socrata did a panel yesterday that touched on a lot of this. You heard some great presentations from the Code for America Fellows, particularly the Indianapolis Fellows this morning, who've been doing a lot of great work with one of our partners in Indianapolis. And so I just really want to take a step back and share with you all what the initiative is, where it came from, what it is not. And really, this is probably going to be about a 15 to 20 minute talk, but I did a lot of recruiting to make sure that we had some of our partners in the room. So Seattle, Bill, Brandon, Denver, New Orleans, Louisville. And so one of the things I really want to have a conversation, if we could hear from them in part on some of the challenges and successes that they've had. But one of the kind of big open issues, and Tiffany alluded to this morning, is, is opening the data in and of itself enough? And so the answer is no, right? and then the question, though, is what type of engagement, if you use the data kind of as a starting point in that process of opening it up, what type of engagement is actually useful? What type of models for engagement exist where you can bring in the community? So not only civic tech stakeholders, but actual citizens, and make this meaningful for them and meaningful in ways to actually hold their representatives and the force that serves them accountable. And so that's really the type of conversation I would love to have kind of after the presentation. If I could just maybe do a quick census in the room. Can I just see hands of folks who are in the law enforcement field in the room? Okay, city government and employees, officials, more broadly, kind of just in kind of civic tech brigade community folks. All right, thank you. Apologies if I missed your classification, but I hope I covered everyone. So good. I think we could get some nice dialogue going. So does this work? Sweet. So as I said, I mean, you've probably seen a picture similar to this at many of the other presentations. It's no secret to where a lot of the impetus for much of the conversation that you've heard today, yesterday, and we'll hear tomorrow has come from. And so it was August 9th, 2014, Mike Brown was killed in Ferguson, Missouri. Subsequent events after that in protest really pushed to the surface the long simmering tensions between, in particular, inner city communities of color, and the police officers and law enforcement agencies in their community, to the point that the sustained efforts of protesters and folks on the ground eventually garnered the attention of the president, national press, and pushed for and demanded reforms, right? And so, which eventually led the White House to ask this question, maybe not quite in this way, but essentially starting to grapple with this idea of how do we rebuild, restore trust, or establish trust where it may never have existed between police departments and the communities that they serve. And so to grapple with this question, the president established the 21st Century Policing Task Force, which essentially dealt with, what are some of the best practices, recommendations that we could put forth as a task force to really start to move the ball forward on reestablishing trust within these communities. And Bill, who was here, you testified before the task force, correct? What was the topic of your testimony, Bill?
Social media and was a large part of it. Use of social media and policing.
Yep.
Before I was actually affiliated with the Seattle Police Department.
Yeah. And so the task force did basically listening sessions all around the country, D.C., Cincinnati. I forget where the others were. But this idea, just basically to hear from the community of what was desired and what was working, what could be replicated elsewhere. So out of the task force, there was a final report that included 59 recommendations for how to reestablish trust within these communities. Quick show, has anyone read the report? Maybe glimpsed over it. As Cam mentioned yesterday, it's a few hours read, quick read, but very interesting. And so one of the things that I think, and I wrote it down because I didn't want to mess it up, but the first sentence of the introduction to the report reads, "Trust between law enforcement agencies and the people they protect and serve is essential in a democracy. It is key to the stability of our communities, the integrity of our criminal justice system, and the safe and effective delivery of policing services." And I firmly believe that in particular, that first line is essential in a democracy, right? That relationship, effective policing, you feeling safe in your community is built on this fundamental idea of trust and you actually instilling, as a citizen, instilling legitimacy into this organization. And without that, I really don't know where we're at. And so this is a really important issue in time that we're dealing with. What was interesting, out of the 59 recommendations, we looked at that, saw that 14 of those dealt in some way with this idea of departments leveraging technology, data, and or transparency, increased transparency to build trust within communities. But kind of with that, we saw, and from my experience in working with law enforcement partners as well as others, kind of two key challenges that were on the horizon that, if we could address them, could actually start to knock down some of those recommendations. And so the first was, and again, I don't know, what people's backgrounds are here in terms of working with law enforcement. And I had done a little bit previous to coming into the role as a fellow. But this conversation of sharing data and open data says this would have been a non-starter even about 2 years ago. And so this very first challenge is the lack of transparency around policing. If you looked around, many departments had no problem sharing data around crime incidents. But there was a fundamental lack of how are police interacting with citizens on a day-to-day basis. And the officer-involved shootings kind of gets the top billing on the headlines. But it's really much more beyond that. It's really the day-to-day. In New York, there was the stop and frisk data, right? Or it's traffic stops, or it might just be community engagement. What officers attended, what meetings within the community, things that we just did not have. And for such a crucial linchpin of democracy, right? We didn't have really good data around how this entity was interacting with citizens, right? And so that was the first piece, kind of this data piece, right? The open data piece. And the second piece that the Police Data Initiative was really looking to tackle was, again, it goes back to data, but a bit more on the internal accountability side, right? And how can departments better use data internally to understand what their officers are doing, where interventions could be made, what interventions were effective or not. So one of the things, you start talking to a lot of law enforcement agencies and they say, oh, well, yeah, we have an early warning system. We can identify the officers who might be a problem, but nobody has really done the work to validate whether or not these systems work. And so what's been interesting, though, is on the crime fighting side, departments have actually gotten really savvy around using data analytics to do predictive policing and things of that nature. And so this idea was like, how do we then use some of that same intelligence to do kind of internal policing, right? Internal accountability. How can we stop not just account for bad use of force incidents, but how can we just stop them before they happen, right? And so those are the two pieces that the Police Data Initiative is focused on tackling. The piece that I'm going to talk about mostly today is the open data component. Lynn Overman, who you saw sitting on the stage earlier, has been leading a lot of work around this second piece and doing some connections around university researchers, data science groups, and putting them in contact with police departments to do a bit more learning on what we're calling this data-driven community policing piece. In both of these instances, as alluded to before, kind of significant barriers existed. One of the big ones is cultural, but then there's also, as you can imagine, the technical issues, who inside these institutions could actually do a lot of what we were talking about. And then obviously the gorilla in the room always is the financial issues. So those are some of the things here that we wanted to try to design the initiative to tackle, and knowing that if we didn't get past these barriers, we weren't going to end up anywhere. So we started pitching this idea internally, and when we started early on, is it still on? Okay. We started early on. We had a goal of getting 5 departments on board, and we thought if we could just get a few departments on board to show that you start opening up data sets, that it's not going to be the end of the world, and actually you may take a bad hit in the press initially for what your data looks like or what it might say, but over the long run, right, if you can continue to show that you're not hiding anything, that you're continuing to be forthcoming, that you're not cooking the book, so to speak, that you can actually make some gains in terms of establishing trust within the community. And we sought out to just get 5 departments. Folks told us that wasn't going to happen. And again, it was in part because of that old, the pre-Ferguson, if you will, in which departments weren't even really willing to have this conversation by and large. I won't say all, but by and large. But Ferguson changed a lot. This question of, do protests matter? Does laying down, stopping, in the middle of the street? All that aside, everyone in this room, I think you would be hard pressed to say that the conversation has not changed in a very drastic way because of that work on the ground. And so we found ourselves, the law enforcement agencies are not ignorant. Like they're watching the news. They know that the world around them has shifted. And so we actually found a lot of agencies saying, yeah, we would love to figure out this piece that you're talking about. Help us, right? Or, show us what other departments have been doing so that we can lead that way, follow that way as well. And so this past May, the president announced the launch of the Police Data Initiative. At that point, we had 21 police departments participating, and I'll show you a list of them in a minute. We are now at 26 on what we're calling kind of our initial cohort of departments, in which we're working with departments so they've all, and when I say participating, each of the departments have committed to release at least 3 data sets around, come on in. At least 3 data sets around police-citizen interactions. So things like officer-involved shootings, use of force, traffic stops. We've seen departments come up with community engagement data sets. So data about where officers have attended meetings. Lamar could probably talk a little bit about some of the, I think it's professional standards or professional development data set that the New Orleans is putting together. And again, it's this idea of telling the citizens about the interactions that they've been having, right, and how to reflect their reality in the data. So our crime data is great. Departments have kind of already been doing that, so we really wanted to make a push on this police-citizen interaction data. So the big activities under this is, and so there's somewhat of this misnomer that the White House is collecting data and creating kind of a national database of police-citizen interaction data sets. That is not what we're doing. Our whole focus here is in part doing what the White House does best, and that's it's like the super connector, if you will, is looking across the landscape, seeing who's doing something really good, and connecting those folks with one another such that we can have this replication, such that folks can learn from one another, and such that we can uplift the leaders and show the art of the possible, if you will. And so, and it's our kind of thesis and firm belief that while it's great, at some point to have this national, it might be to have this national database. I'm not in a position personally to make that happen, but I think the real value is actually, again, we talk about like, is it good enough just to open the data, right? I think the real value is if we can open up data sets at the local level, right? It's about trust between the local police department and the local citizens, not trust between, the database that the White House or the Department of Justice might be creating in citizens. And so our real focus is working with departments and municipalities to and oftentimes connect themselves at the local level. And so a lot of times you have IT folks on the municipal side who may not have ever talked to the police department folks. And one of the things we discovered, there's a lot of times a lot of capacity on the municipal level that departments are not tapping into. And one of the early wins that we had along this was just having conversations happen because folks were participating now to create those linkages. So one of the things we'll talk about a little bit is again, we kind of firmly believe in this idea of community-based events and local support to build on top of the data sets and to create value across those. We're also working on a few other things of creating platforms and resources to be resources for other departments who want to come along later and hopefully join this initiative. And I keep saying we. But I should say we aren't doing much of this. We're working with a lot of really great partners. The Code for America folks who you heard from earlier today, International Association of Chiefs of Police is one of our lead partners, the largest law enforcement membership organization in the country. Police Foundation, Socrata, Esri, other folks, DataKind, who are kind of helping out, pitching in where they can. As you see, there are a lot of folks, there's a hot issue right now, and there's a lot of people who care deeply and passionately about this issue who are trying to figure out ways to contribute their skill set to this. And that presents somewhat of a challenge, but when we can create those meaningful pathways to actually have that engagement, we found it to be a very positive thing. So again, I run through just fairly quickly the kind of open data and policing piece. Again, this is kind of our thesis here, right? This idea that the act of consistent open data release to the public over time will inherently help to build and sustain trust in the communities the law enforcement agencies serve as a baseline. And we'll talk a little bit later about how do we build from there. But this is first and foremost our goal, where for so long departments weren't even at the table. And I will tell you, one of the biggest pieces early on is just even this, we toss around this term open data here very freely, like we all know what it means. But that was an early education process of just talking to a lot of departments. They'd say, oh, well, we post all our data online. Go download our PDFs of our annual report. And it's not that, I think sometimes in our community we look and say, oh, well, the departments don't want to share that data. That's why they posted it in a PDF. They actually thought that when they posted it in a PDF that they were sharing the data in a really accessible format, right? And when we say that's great, you use some data to create that report. We'd love to see that as well. So it's just about having those conversations and showing up in a very earnest manner and not in coming from a place of deep skepticism. I'm open to being pushed on this, but this is kind of the thesis that we're working on to try to see play out. So one of the big pieces there is how do you measure trust, right? And if you have good ideas and have seen good practices for that, would love to hear that. So we started this out back in April. Laura can see that's Laura right there, wave. We had a convening April 8th at the White House where we started to, we wanted to bring together law enforcement agencies, civic technologists, put them together in a room and really talk with one another to figure out what are your issues, what can we help with, how can we help, in what ways can we positively engage. Ian was there. I think there were a few others. So there's DJ Patel, U.S. Chief Data Scientist, as well as some of our law enforcement partners. It was a really powerful day for me personally, and as you see, here's our open data commitment board. And what was kind of nice about this, we just asked departments to at least make 3 commitments. Some came in with their 3 commitments already. Throughout the day, you saw folks it became somewhat of a competition And this is really somewhat of the idea of the Police Data Initiative, to show, as I think Tiffany put out a challenge earlier, to show, if these departments can do it, why, like, your excuses kind of go off the table a bit, right? And so you see, I think that's Austin on the bottom row that just started slapping stuff up. And so, but they actually released quite a few data sets about 2 weeks ago, and so we were a little skeptical that they were going to come through, but they did. So out of that kind of came the initial cohort, this idea through the commitments and understanding basically how we wanted to frame this community of practice going forward. And so so now we're, like I said, we're at 26 cities now, some counties as well. All of which have been in this kind of process towards opening up data sets. A conversation me and Lamar were just having, one of the things that we intentionally did not do as part of this was set any type of definitive timeline for departments to open up their data sets. And what we did is we asked departments, what is a reasonable time, given where you are at right now, what is a reasonable timeline? Recognizing that each department has their own bureaucratic processes. Some already have, say, an open data, Socrata or Esri portal that they could just really quickly plug into. Others were just starting from scratch. And so we've slowly started to see kind of a wave of sets being released. And I'll show you in a little bit where you can kind of track some of that. I can't fully divulge all the sets that are forthcoming, but I think you'll start to see a lot more use of force data sets coming out mid to late October, as well as a few others that folks might be interested in. Thank you, Ari. So just some quick examples here of what started to happen. This was actually really nice. Dallas police chief Dallas had actually released a lot of their officer-involved shooting data already, but they had it on a website. It was just HTML tables. It was great, but all it took was just like a little bit extra effort, and it was Socrata actually said, "Hey, we can help you guys. You guys have a portal with the city of Dallas already. We can help the police department just put that into the portal," and that was kind of just a quick flip of the switch. One thing that I'm going to have Lamar talk about, because I don't think everybody was here yesterday, was this really, I'm going to say, beautiful event that happened in New Orleans, where they've been working to release some data sets, and they actually did a pre-release of the data sets with a youth coding boot camp. And so you see here one of the campers working with the Chief Harrison, looking at some of the data sets. I think I'll let Lamar tell, but the chief is writing his first line of code right there. But it was a really awesome event, and I think something that doesn't happen enough of not just the civic tech folks showing up to develop solutions and apps for solutions that they see, right? But actually having the citizens there as stakeholders, having them grapple with the data. But the other big key there, and I want Lamar to speak a little bit on this, you see the government folks showing up, right? And the police department being present. Lamar was present. And so how do you create these events, these engagements where we use the data? The data is there, but it's really just a means to convene, right? And so we can have an honest conversation about that. You guys saw this earlier, and this is great kind of inventory that is being done by CFA folks. And so this one of the things that has come out of this. Police Foundation, as I said, has started to do what they've called their public safety open data portal. And so they're specifically tracking a lot of data sets that are coming out of or being released through the Police Data Initiative. And they're also kind of behind the scenes providing a lot of technical assistance to departments as they grapple with. And one of the things that and I know this question is going to come up later, and we can have a good discussion about it. We're not advocating any standards per se for the data right now. And what we hope to see is over time, as departments start to release these sets, hopefully some emergent standards to see what's best practice, to see what is, if you're releasing a data set that may have 3 fields and Dallas is releasing the same set that has 15 fields, how can we get you from 3? Maybe you can't get all the way to 15 because your local laws don't allow that, but maybe you can get to 10, right? And so what type of emergent standards come out of this? and how can, again, departments learn from one another. And what's interesting is we have seen is as departments are starting to think about releasing these sets, they're starting to ask for, well, can you guys just give us a template for what we should be releasing, right? And so this kind of this, I think that approach may work a little bit better than saying you have to release this, right? So we'll see. I mean, a lot of this is still is definitely still a work in progress. Those sites, you should definitely follow along to see what's being released. And I think the big thing that I want to end on a bit is this idea. I talked about that baseline before of let's push, get the data out there. But then how do we engage you all? How do we engage others, citizens, other stakeholders to be meaningful participants in this process, not just for a one weekend event, but over time, such as this data and accountability becomes real within the community. And I think that, there's a lot of interesting stuff that comes out of this. I think a lot of times we think that you need, a certain skill set to be able to do anything with this data. I think one of the most powerful things that came from that New Orleans event was just this idea of you saw citizens, young kids, young men, young women, looking at these data sets discovering that the city had these data sets for the first time, but then just being able to do a quick lookup and see and validate their experience of, we called in, that 311 call, and the city has it here represented and it was resolved, and that's true. And that in and of itself, I think, goes a long way towards building that type of trust. So I quickly want to end on just this simple question of how can we, all of us, work together. I'll take questions on Police Data Initiative, where we're going. Of the departments who are not signed up in the room, please do. You can come talk to me after. But maybe have a quick conversation around what we've seen, what you all have seen to work in terms of community engagement, not just around police data, but just what I'm really interested in is kind of these effective partnerships in which government agencies are able to allow kind of external communities within the door. I know Seattle has kind of a good example of this as well. But one of the things that we get a lot and that I personally struggle with is we have a lot of really skilled, well-intentioned folks who will come to me and say, love what you guys are doing, Police Data Initiative. I live in Durham. How can I help? How can I help? And I honestly, a lot of times, I don't feel like I have a good response for a meaningful, productive pathway to engage that individual, other than say, go talk to your Code for America brigade, right, or something like that. So I'm just curious. I'm just curious. Have others seen kind of really effective engagement strategies for that, or where maybe a police department might put out a problem statement? And I'll tell you one. So we have when the president announced that, you saw there was what we call a Camden Tech Team, right? And so Camden Police Department, they were going through kind of basically a new procurement of a records management system. And all they really wanted was some folks from the outside who had a good technical experience, had gone through this procurement process before, to tell them what to look out for, to tell them, to make some recommendations around what they should be looking for in a system so that they don't have, vendor lock-in or data lock-in, things like that. I had a recent conversation with Montgomery County Police Department, who they're going through this process. They have a all paper-based use of force reporting system right now, which allows for a lot of gamification by the officers to not report or report in a certain way such that it doesn't raise a flag on your really effective early warning system. And so they just they said, hey, is there a team of folks that you can have just talk with us to understand how we might design a better use of force data collection system? And so I think there are those opportunities out there for folks to engage. It's just not clear, how do you do that on a ongoing basis? Yes.
Okay.
Debbie.
I'm going to explode here because I have so many things I want to ask you. And it really spawns from starting from this morning, So a couple of things is, I think what I didn't hear today is the absence of this conversation is tapping into, I saw your map, and tapping into your local criminal justice coordinating committees or councils. For example, if anybody's here from the state of Pennsylvania, which I am not, but every county in Pennsylvania has a criminal justice coordinating council. And in fact, the National Governors Association just hosted a forum last week called Silos to System. And criminal justice coordinating councils work at a systems level within your community, bringing together your key stakeholders from not only justice, but from your mental health, from your juvenile justice, from that whole range. And many communities, just like me, because I'm actually a director of one of them, is that's what we work on at a systems level. And so I would encourage anyone who, like Durham, North Carolina has one, Charlotte, Mecklenburg has one. And so to me, I'm thinking that when we talk about those ecosystems, that is, I think, missing from this conversation for the last couple of days, of tapping into that resource. The other thing, because for example, in my community, I'm from Adams County, which is a metro right out of Denver. Through our CJCC, we're doing sequential intercept mapping. We are mapping out what the system can do, where are we on the silos of how are we not sharing information across those, cross agencies, and then looking at, okay, wow, we have a lot of resources over here, but we have none on the front end. And so we look at that from a technical perspective, but also a policy perspective. So just wanted to mention that. The other thing that I cringed when you said there are no standards. I'm curious where your global reference architecture comes into this, and your NEAM and your GFIPM, which are national standards for sharing. And there's been a lot of work in that field for the last 20 years. And so I'm curious why that isn't also part of this effort that you're doing in terms of trying to bring those, the silos to systems, where that's what the whole purpose of GRA is about, is to not necessarily advocate for people to replace their existing systems, but if we all have a common way of language and sharing that data, then connecting those data systems to like federated queries or whatever becomes more possible. So I'm just curious, so I got more things I want to say, but I know that was a lot thrown at you, but can you address that GRA, and so where are you working? Are you working with the Global Advisory Committee at the White House level on that, or even the PMS-ISE, which is the Project Management Information Sharing Group right out of the White House? How are you all working together in that sense?
I have a quick answer for that. Okay, good. We are not. It is. And so I was caveat, this is the beginning, not the end. And there are a lot of other standards too, right? Like NIBRS, National Incident-Based Reporting. And so there's ongoing conversations around, how do we, again, not replicate, but start to integrate these things. And again, I think we're still at a place of, even before we get there, of how can we even socialize this idea of transparency, of sharing, and I think we will quickly get there. Where you're talking about, but I still think that yes. But no, great questions. And on your first pieces, we'd love to talk to you more about those. I know, for instance, National Neighborhood Indicator Partnership Groups. There are a lot of folks in existing entities that I think could be really good partners around this.
And I want to say too is I also feel like there's a lot of focus on at that arrest level, which no argument there, but there's the rest of the criminal justice system that in fact we're building a query system within our county because there is no sharing. And so when you talk to the judge, just talking about a judge who is trying to make a sentencing decision and does not have absent information about not only what is the criminal history, but what are the resources out there, even within your probation and corrections. And there is just that void, and so you're asking judges to make decisions on lack of information. And I think that too needs to be brought into this conversation as well.
Definitely, and you may have heard a little bit about that this morning. So Lynn, who was leading that panel, she's starting to. So this focus was initially policing, and we were very clear about that. But Lynn is actually, as part of her portfolio work, is starting to look at how do we expand this to the criminal justice system at large. I think you see Code for America starting to do a bit more in that space as well. So it's coming. No. Brandon.
I want to speak a little bit to what you were just describing. I can tell you, as someone who is actually
So where are you from, Brandon?
I'm from Seattle. I'm the GIS analyst for the Seattle Police Department. So I'm one of the people who actually puts the data together that goes out from the system.
Yes, and you know how difficult that is.
I do know how difficult it is. And I can tell you that having access to a NIEMS compliance system and a NIBRS compliance system means almost nothing because of the way it's implemented.
Yes.
The difficulty is the fact that what I've come to realize is that sometimes a lot of these systems were made in situations that predate what we need to do with them now. And so as a result, the more vendor lock-in you tend to have with the systems, the more difficult it is to pull data out, the more expertise you need just to be able to query and analyze the data.
Yes.
And when you have a public that may not be aware of that fact, they misconstrue a difficulty or inability to retrieve the data with a desire to withhold the data.
Yes.
And that is two different things. The problem with standards is that there's so many of them. Is there, do we have a NIEMS compliance system, or do we do this stuff for UCR reporting, or do we adhere to NIBRS, or are we going to stick to what we actually do for actual deployment of our officers and things like that? There does need to be more collaboration and integration of these disparate systems, because there are a lot of silos, and every department out there is probably working on some form of a common query like you're talking about to try to be able to provide that additional information.
Right.
But it really boils down to the twofold aspect. First of all, the policies and the laws need to catch up to the realities of what we're dealing with today. And secondly, there needs to be additional technical expertise to understand, and context. Context is key to understand the data that you're working with. In the Seattle area, something as simple as, hey, can we get a data set showing all of the arrests, is massively complex, because there is no such thing as, quote, a simple arrest in the city of Seattle.
Right.
There's arrests, and there's bookings, and there's charges, and there's three different things that can happen all at once or in random pairings. And so that makes the retrieval of data very difficult. Different vendors make things difficult to retrieve. Our CAD system alone, the database that I have to go in and pull 911 call data, is over 600 tables in a database where everything's not easily joined together. Then you have the RMS system, which is another 400 tables. And so we don't have big data in the sense that we have hundreds and hundreds of millions or billions of records like some large organizations do. We have big data in terms of, we have a few million records. Our stuff can fit on a thumb drive. But it's so complex that it takes a massive effort just to be able to get the appropriate data sets together, be able to give people what they want. And so that's a difficult thing to come to terms with. So I would say, oftentimes, the integration really is the name of the game. Somebody at some point, when you are either building a system or purchasing a system, needs to have an eye towards what are you really going to be doing with this, not just right now, but down the road. And when you have that understanding, you can make sure you have the right system in place to make it easier to pull the right information out later on.
So I'm going to go here, there, and then here.
Stand up because it might be awkward to sit right next to you and talk through a mic. I really appreciate Brandon's point, though, right? Pulling the data out is sometimes much more complex than it might first appear. And sort of when you're asked to start doing an open data kind of thing, especially in policing, just getting to the point of getting a yes is a hard thing sometimes, and you're not. At that point, you're not able to worry about, what standard should it come out in. Just give it to me in whatever form it happens to be there now. As long as the quality is good and you can sustain it, we can come back and do the appropriate transforms to put it in the right format whenever the appropriate format is identified. In the beginning, it's not even quite known what data sets are going to be ultimately what people want to see, right? We can release a set of things from our use of force data set, but turns out, and we learned some of these things during that hackathon, that some folks just don't care about some of those tables and some of those columns. And there are some things that we didn't include that we thought were trivial that folks really wanted to see because it helped them to link a certain idea or a certain piece of innovation together. So we can't have a standard because it's not quite clear what we're putting out yet, or what's going to be needed yet. I think ultimately you do want to have those, but there's so much work because it's such a nascent area right now. There's so much pre-work that needs to happen right now, such that when that's done, then we can come back and kind of think about standards. That's just sort of our position kind of early on in this right now. So.
Over here.
Around the vendor lock-in issue on CAD and RMS systems. I'm in Oakland. The situation is we have a very old system from a vendor that doesn't even sell it.
What is CAD for everyone? Just so we get away from acronyms.
That. And it's a separate system, and change requests go into a queue that costs way more. Where are open source solutions here? Where are vendors that are providing agile solutions? Lots and lots of cities are at just this point now. If we were going to spend some money, what should we buy? This seems like a place where we should be able to compare solutions with one another, share best practices. Where can that happen?
Can I punt to CFA? Or no?
I ended up brigade in St. Louis. And we just had a hackathon trying to develop some tools that are going to be open source that can be hopefully be used by those vendors to improve what they have. But we don't have like a whole open source solution. That's one thing that we worked on recently. Thanks.
I guess in addition, I would say, so CFA's been doing some work on procurement in general, not as we haven't done as much in the safety and justice space yet. But we recently advised the California Department of Social Services on the procurement, or the RFP, the drafting of the RFP for their new child welfare system. And I think the process of putting those white papers together, I see a lot of lessons that could be drawn for public agencies across the spectrum. And so I don't know if this will just be my CFA answer for the moment. But we are kind of trying to get out some more content about that that's a little bit more generalized in its use. Also, we have a community of practice that's been meeting monthly by video conference and a Google group where I actually would like to do some more work around sort of vendor engagement. We have done a little bit of connecting with iPro, which I think Oakland uses for its internal affairs. A lot of the PDI cities do, and that's been actually a really productive conversation. They were very helpful in facilitating the development of Indianapolis's tool that they demoed this morning. But yeah, I mean, I hear you on those challenges. I don't think we've quite cracked the net either, but it's definitely something we're interested in pushing more on and partnering with people.
Oh, can I say
for you? Yes. Did you talk to anyone who uses the iAPRO system?
Well, yeah, I mean, Indy, our city partners in Indy use iAPRO.
Okay, because we use it in Seattle, and I have not heard very good things about it.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to hype iPro as a system. I'm not trying to not hype it either. I don't use it.
I don't use it either.
I've heard mixed things about it, but I guess the strategy of engaging with their leadership was really helpful in terms of, I think, as an organized group, to say 21 police departments that are, at the time, I think 21 or 22 now, 25, 26 police departments that are part of the Police Data Initiative, to come to their CEO and kind of talk about, first of all, we want to build this connector to extract data, but second of all, actually, here are some issues that we're having with the system in terms of trying to drive for more transparency, and here's sort of a list of prioritization of features that we need today to do the type of analysis or end-use support that's really going to be productive in driving work around accountability and transparency. I think surfacing those things as an organized group of police department customers across the country and coming at it from that vantage point holds a lot of promise.
So can I, as someone who oversees the company's work and answer to the question of where are the agile open source solutions, we need entrepreneurs at the table to talk about how we can build companies that can compete with the current options. It doesn't sound like there are a ton of great options that are really challenging the entrenched vendors or the current systems to innovate themselves. And we can't do that without a lot of capital. And we can't just depend on nonprofits like Code for America or people who are working under constraints in government or volunteers, as great as the work that they're doing is. So, I really encourage any entrepreneurs in the room to start looking at these as problems and to start we need to start pushing the capital community, venture capital community, start investing at scale in companies that can challenge the entrenched vendors. It's not going to happen tomorrow, unfortunately, but that's really just the reality.
Yeah, and I think just to put another point on what Jenny was saying, one of the things that was interesting, and Lamar actually led some of this work around identifying IAPRO deficiencies, at least for what they were trying to accomplish, and then trying to rally support from other PDI cities. At the convening that we had in April, there was a palatable frustration from the police department saying, we often get the software pushed on us and we never get an opportunity to design the requirements and to say, here's what we need. I think hopefully one thing that may come out of this is you actually get that voice of, we're the collective customer. You at some point you have to be responsive. But I think for so long you kind of had these one-offs where, the vendors just quite frankly didn't have to be responsive. To iPro's credit, Jenny and them came to them and said, hey, here's what we want to do on top and build on top of your software. And they said, sure, like we don't have the capacity to do it, but we're not going to fight against you guys to do it. So I think those conversations are necessary. And, over time, hopefully, as Catherine said, that, hopefully we'll see some more. And I know there are several startups that are doing law enforcement specific RMS systems. And so hopefully over time we'll see more of that kind of come to fruition. I promised. Yeah. Yep. Yes. I lost track. I promised one back there.
I'll give up my mic as soon as I finish this thread, which
Okay.
is basically echoing we need commercial backup, because procurement of open source solutions in city government is a hard sell in the first place. We have to answer a lot of support questions and continuity questions that the for-profit side doesn't have to solve. We're also up against military-industrial complex vendors that have been doing this for a long time and have lots of clout with police. The reason this seems like an important, pregnant moment is there's a lot of attention on this issue right now and national interest in these issues. It seems like a great place for us to dig in and share as much as we know about the solutions that are out there. Okay.
And I would just echo a plug for joining the CFA community of practice and hopefully continue this conversation around those issues.
Great, thanks. So my question was about money, actually, because I work in different, although I could make an analogy, systems, but also with very big data challenges about making the data interoperable and about bringing these data systems together in a way that they can actually be used and processed. And my understanding of how some of the police departments have had addressed this is that they've had to raise private funding, they've had to do separate bond measures, and that the data integration piece is sometimes the least sexy part of what people are willing to pay for, either with tax money or through private donations. So I'm just curious if people have been able to come up with creative solutions to find funding, not only to build and improve the back-end data sides, but also to find money for long-term stewardship and opening of the data, and not just some of the things that might seem more tangible, like the cameras themselves. So so police departments are now depending on grants in perpetuity? Okay, good to know.
Hey, Kate, I thought you were going to ask this question. It kind of relates to grants and maybe touches a little bit of the third rail, which I know at Summit we don't really talk about policy in Congress as much. But I wonder how much of the results of this program has been shared with Congress, and if you know if any policies are thinking about offering grants or thinking about open data as parts of other grants to police departments around the country, and if that's anything moving either at the state or federal level.
So there's definitely legislation, and that, so you look at Senator Booker, for instance, who has been pushing some legislation around this. There's definitely kind of this top line again. The officer-involved shootings, the use of force has been kind of the elephant in the room. There's definitely been legislative efforts around that. To the extent that those will be successful, I'll let you place a bet on that. So I don't know. In terms of police data initiative and having influenced any of that thus far, I'd say the answer is probably no. It's still a pretty nascent issue, but I think by the time that some legislation is actually possible to pass, our hope is that for a lot of these questions of, as folks talk about, well, we want standards, or what are we going to require through the legislation be collected, right? Hopefully we'll have best practice examples to point to here, and at least some lessons learned to build that on top of. That's the hope. But I don't know if others have a better answer to that, Lynn or anyone else.
I would, at the national level, I would also point to an existing system that DOJ is trying to expand, which is the National Incident-Based Reporting System, which would be, as opposed to UCR, which is aggregate crime reports, we would get down much closer at the incident level. I think we're seeing two really big issues here. One, PDI is trying to address, which is accountability at the local level so that you can understand the policing that's occurring in your own community. But then the ability to compare across communities and understand national trends is really dependent on federal data collection. And we're really falling down in that space. So we are operating in a vacuum of information in this space. There is a solution that exists, but getting uptake at the local level has been a challenge. And then the other problem that we see with a lot of federal data is the latency. So it comes out so far past, a year or two after the events have happened, and it doesn't help either the community or policymakers really figure out how changes are making impact. So it's definitely a struggle.
What's the solution that's not being adopted that you mentioned?
So there's an existing system called NIBRS, National Incident-Based Reporting. And I think some folks are looking into ways to make it easier for departments to report up in that manner, which would give you much more granular information. So it would also be helpful for local police departments too.
So Justin, could you maybe just tell people who you are?
Sorry, I'm Justin Ehrlich. I work for the Department of Justice in California. So follow-up question to that, which for you and for you, Clarence, is how can states help? What is the role that a state can help in this sort of interstitial layer between the federal government, the White House, and cities?
So states currently collect the data that goes to the UCR. So we can certainly talk about NIBRS, but to the extent that you have control or legislation that could help standardize data, one of the big problems, and again, this is not something that we could really tackle in PDI, because our whole point is transparency for trust building. But in terms of, again, being able to compare communities, we have a vastly wide array of different policies around use of force. So actually, even releasing policies on use of force is not going to be, Richmond might have a completely different policy than Oakland. So it may look like Richmond has less and Oakland has more, but Oakland might be actually counting more, which is what you would want. So really kind of understanding not just what the data is, but what policies are driving it, and having some level of standardization so that you can make those comparisons would be really helpful if the states could kind of help think through that as well.
Yeah, I think it's worth reiterating that particularly NIBRS, like the localities report up through the state that ultimately reports to the federal level. And so could be a really strong support role for that in terms of encouraging local law enforcement reporting within the state. And so Justin is also, he didn't say, helped launch led the launch of is it called Open Justice California, or just Open Justice? Open Justice. I'm going to throw it in there, Open Justice California. And so that's their open data effort around, I think, criminal justice data generally as well, right? Okay, it looks like we have like 5 more minutes. I promised you over here, Spike in the back, we can get you, and then hey, Anthea, I'm trying to get to you as well. Yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I am a brigade captain in Philadelphia, and my day job is I have a company that is the vendor for Philadelphia Police Department. We built Philly.citypolice.com about 6 years ago. You might have seen it. We talked about it at Code for America. So I've been pretty steeped in this arena for a while. Philadelphia's been pretty proactive. I want to try to speak up loudly. Philadelphia's been with Commissioner Ramsey, he is all about open data. He's always been that, and that's one of the main reasons why I came on as a vendor to build that, me and my partner. We actually use an open source tool for phillypolice.com, and it works well. And we did get a lot of heat initially about it, but they let us use it, and it works, and it empowers everything from SafeCam and all the tools that we have. So I think it comes down to, and everybody's been having this conversation, open data, it's a beautiful thing, right? We are all sitting here because we want this to be a thing that works. But some of the challenges that I've noticed, one is when you release this data, you need to do something with it. It needs to be in a consumable form. Luckily, with Code, with our brigade, we've been able to have folks come and actually build a map that I've been able to get onto the Philly Police website, which is now the highest viewed page on the site, which is the crime maps page. And that was all because of open data and the Open Data Initiative. And now Part 2 crime series data was released today for Philadelphia. So we're gonna have a lot more cool stuff. So that's but not every city has that cool community like Philadelphia has. And what we've been able to do and build, me as a vendor and also building as a community, it's a challenge for us to say, okay, here's Chicago, try, when you're trying to do this initiative, and I think this is what you do, is you look at this and you say, okay, it worked here. Can it work here? Can it work there? Can it work there? But it's definitely not that easy, especially dealing with that, and especially the internal issues that you have to go through to get all that data and information. Then once you have it, you got 1,000 PDFs, right? Because everybody loves PDFs at these departments. And, and then they give it to us as a vendor, or they say we want to present it in a way, right? Put it on a table. Okay, now it's an HTML table that has to be scraped by if somebody really wants to do something with it. So it's it's a range of issues, and like Catherine was saying, we got the people here. There's the talent is here. We just need to come together and just challenge the old guard, right? The Microsoft staff, the guys that live in the military industrial complex now that are really doing it. And I just wanted to share that.
I'd like to quickly thank our sponsor, Microsoft.
No. I love you, Microsoft. That was just you. You're gonna be fine. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Yeah.
We're gonna do one right here, and then 2 in the back. Wrap up.
Okay. Occasionally, the efforts that are actually being done, people think that they're being done and they're not. So, for example, NIBRS, when BJS collects the data from NIBR for those responses, incidents, they get tossed into a giant database at a university, I think of Minnesota. So I just checked the website. And that's it. They then have to attempt to make it conform to the justice data schema that was they last got yelled at by the Code for America Brigade in DC for not doing a good enough job of adhering to the schemas that they just the JSON schemas that they required them to adhere to. So while the data is there, sometimes they don't necessarily adhere to the standards after they've been And then they just continue to take their time because they've got another military-industrial complex style contractor doing it for them. I guess we've got to keep our senators honest.
I know that sometimes there's data release as part of the settlement agreement. Is that data release generally a one-time dump, or is it like API access or ongoing data release? And like, does that at all feed into this data ecosystem, or is it totally divorced?
That's a great question. We can have New Orleans, Seattle have been under consent decrees.
I can't speak to a class
perspective, but it's generally fairly amorphous.
I can't speak to a class action lawsuit, but for example, in Seattle, we have public disclosure requests, and they're probably very similar. They're usually a one-time thing for that request, and it's like raw data, zero context. And if there's one thing to get across to the brigades and the user community, is that without the appropriate context, you are not going to understand the data that you're working with, especially police data, because of all of the legal and procedural information that needs to be supplementing the data that you're looking at. If you don't know that, you are going to erroneously analyze the data, guaranteed, and it's going to lead to wrong conclusions. I've seen it happen a lot from very, very prominent data scientists and people who don't have the appropriate context of how the data was collected or what it's been used for, drawing the wrong conclusions when they do their very high-tech analysis on this raw data. So that's the problem with the class action lawsuits and public disclosures. None of the context is being given along with the data.
Speaking as a former trial lawyer, I know that, so I think
actually the New York stop and frisk data came out as a result of a lawsuit, and I think they're releasing it, and Chicago, I think, was in the same circumstance. Some of this could just be like a tech education of lawyers, because you can, like, part of a settlement in a lawsuit or part of the end of a lawsuit is defining the terms. So part of what you could ask for, and FOIA really gave birth to the open data movement. Like, FOIA is old school open data. So being strategic about the way it's used and asking for ongoing disclosure is something you can certainly work into an agreement with the context.
Yeah, well, and then also asking for it in the format. Like, so speaking as a former federal civil rights enforcement lawyer, you know, I definitely drafted orders for data collection and disclosure that like resulted in data collection and disclosure of like no value for analysis, because that was like years before I would have known how to even draft that, you know? So anyway. Someone should do a one-pager for trial lawyers on that.
Like, you can tell the lawyers what to ask for. There are ways to enforce. It gives you a different angle to enforce.
So speaking of enforcement, thank you, man. I was curious. So, on two levels, the accountability around all this. So, at a local level, there's essentially zero visibility into this as a thing in Oakland. Like, no one really knows that OPD is committed to doing this and being part of this. So, I'm curious what the anticipation was as far as, is there accountability expected at a local level? And then is there any beautiful push of accountability going to be happening at the federal level? Because things are going to be very slow in some cities, and I'm really interested in how this, because this is a wonderful thing if it works. So I'm really interested in what thought there've been around what is accountability and what's possible there.
Yes, okay, we will wrap.
Thank you.
The quick answer on that is accountability is will have to happen at the local level with engaged industry, law. And stay for the next session to hear more about that from you. But we can talk. Thank you all.